Hi, this is Carole Baskin, and today on the Cat Chat Show we have David Enden, the director of Big Cats from Generation Awakening. I have seen on Facebook you guys have been so involved in so many things that are so dear to my heart, which are the big cats, and there's just a wide array of things that I know you're going to be able to talk with us about today. Can you let our viewers know a little bit more about how you got involved with Big Cats?
Sure, and I think my story is a little message in itself. I had attended the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and I had a really tremendous passion for conservation. I have to admit, people like Steve Irwin and individuals like that I saw on TV, I really wanted to make a difference and impact people. So I got my degree in conservation biology, and I started being really interested in animal behavior. So I took a trip to South Africa, Kruger Park, and that's where my passion for big cats really solidified. We took a 4-hour trip from Johannesburg to Kruger Park, and I saw not one animal, not
Wow.
one wildlife. And then I started to realize, Africa really isn't what you think it is on TV. And so then here I am, finally in Kruger Park, and it took me 5 days to come across a photograph or a photo opportunity of a male lion, and the photo had a road in the background. So that in itself really illustrates how desperately these animals need our help and our participation in their conservation. And so I came back, my heart was set on big cats, I had to make a difference for them. But it's not very easy to tell your mom that you want to work with big cats for the rest of your life. So I took an opportunity down in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, working as an intern for Turpentine Creek Wildlife Refuge. And I spent 6 days a week for 6 months caring for over 130 big cats. And that's when I found out what's going on here in the United States. And that's when I realized, how can I travel halfway across the world when there is such a need to help these animals right here on our own soils and in our own backyards. And so what I'm very young in the field, and I'm using it as my advantage. I started to make a film after I've completed my internship, documenting on big cats here in the United States. And I'm actually mentoring under Tim Harrison, who is the director of Outreach for Animals and one of the stars in Elephant in the Living Room. And that experience was a gift in itself, because it really allowed me to go undercover, so to speak, and talk to a lot of the key players that are involved in the big cat issue here in the U.S. and hear all sorts of different sides and really investigate what's going on. And so from there, I became director at Generation Awakening. And what we're trying to do right now is we're really trying to put an emphasis on what's going on here in the United States. And we would really like, the United States Humane Society estimates that the exotic pet trade last year was over $20 billion.
Wow.
And, that's in an extremely logical estimate. We really don't know the exact numbers of the exotic pet trade here in the United States. But the domestic pet trade was $56 billion, and that's available on their site. So when you think about how many people have snakes and all these, cats and all these exotic animals, it really is a very logical statistic. But my big argument is we have 7 out of the 9 subspecies of leopards. 3 of them are critically endangered. We have 3,000 tigers left in the wild. Lion numbers are drastically decreasing. Imagine what $20 billion that are irresponsibly being spent on exotic pets here in the United States could do for conservation in the wild. And so that's what my main focus and where I'm going to take my career is sort of refocusing us away from the selfishness of having these animals as pets and being more responsible individuals and putting that money towards conservation in the wild.
It sounds like you came from a background that wasn't so, would not have been characterized as a bunny hugger, and yet you saw what was happening out there, and it made a huge impact on you, so much so that you felt like, this is something I can fix, this is something I can change. And I think there are a lot of people like you who love animals, love the big cats, but they just don't know that some of the things that they do are causing harm to the big cats, like paying to have their pictures made with the cubs and paying to see babies at facilities. Um, so it sounds like your mission or your vision is to try and reach those people and refocus that love of animals in a way that could actually save them.
And you're absolutely right. My mission isn't to reach the people that are already following us and listening to what we're doing. My mission is to reach John Smith down the road who absolutely loves tigers, but just doesn't know any better. And that is my goal all the time. There's a study, scholastic study field called environmental interpretation. And it's all about how do we create an emotional attachment between our guests and our viewers and our resource, or in this case, our cats. And so I study that intensely, figure out what we can do. You know, nowadays, everyone my age, they're so engulfed in pop culture and social media and all this stuff. And you know, my goal is how do we get those individuals to care and realize what's happening. And that's really, really important for me. It's sort of what our organization stands for, is the generation awakening, is how do we enable this generation to really to act. You know, unfortunately, would I have liked a different career choice, possibly, different life, a little bit easier, yeah. But the reality of it is we've made some mistakes. And this is the make or break time, and we really have to step up and fix what's going on. And for everyone else out there that does love these animals, it's very difficult. I've run to people all the time my age that are sending me pictures because they see what I'm doing, and they admire my passion, and they admire what I'm doing for these animals, but their pictures will be them in cubs, or them petting another tiger or a lion. And it's very difficult, and that's where we as leaders, I believe, have the biggest challenge. And I learned a lot of this from Tim Harrison. And it's really about educating that person. And it really takes a lot out of us because
you've said it 1,000 times, and it's like,
yeah,
1,001 can you still be nice when you say it?
Exactly. But that's the only way. And I've seen people my age with that method completely turn around. And again, I'm going to stress it, it's education. And what I love so much about my graduate program here at Colorado State University is I've kind of been saturated with education again. And it has opened my eyes, because right now, my job right now is not necessarily, and this is a funny conversation with me and Dad, but I don't really know exactly what I'm going to do for a career. I just know what I want to do with my life. And so my job right now is to learn as much and see as much as I can to find all these little pieces of the puzzle and put it together to solve a problem. And what I've found in only just a brief semester here during my graduate program is how much science could help us. And in doing so, you know, a lot of people that want to go in and cuddle with these animals and have these animals as pets, their arguments on why they should do so is solely based on how they feel.
Right.
But if we provide the information and the scientific facts that are unarguable in court and to opinions, then we're illustrating what needs to be done. And if there's one thing that is clearly illustrated, it is how complex it is to keep a wild animal in captivity. If you read the book Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond, he illustrates how civilizations came to be and how domestication occurred. And the animals that were not domesticated during his time frame, they weren't domesticated because they couldn't be. And you know, domestication of wild animals is, simply put, they're bred to have behaviors and character traits that are favorable to people. Now you go to zoos and you see an aggressive animal in a zoo, and some people are like, oh well, you know, we can't have that animal being aggressive. Well then, that's a wild animal. That's not a domesticated animal, and it's supposed to be acting the way it's supposed to be acting. And so my point really here is that if tigers and lions and leopards, if they were meant to be domesticated, I believe that it would have happened already. And I think that they're They deserve to be left wild, and I think that if we do really care about them, we will care about the habitats that they live in, and we will focus on preserving them.
You know, it's kind of interesting that I've never really thought about it this way until you just now said this. The very thing that attracts us to big cats is that they are beyond our ability to tame or to touch. And if we were able to tame them and keep them as house pets, I don't think they would hold that same allure that they do as being the wild animals that they are. And so in essence, what people have been trying to do is make the tiger a common tabby, something that they would not appreciate as much as they do in its current state.
You know, I had expressed my story of going and seeing these animals in the wild. That is the most beautiful thing. And you know, if you want to see them and you appreciate their beauty, you have to see them being a tiger and being a lion, and that's not in a living room. And something really interesting that I've kind of come across throughout my observations and my studies is that with the big cats that we're working with right now in this situation, this is a whole entire new field. You know, when you look at tigers in the wild, there's studies that are done on these tigers and these cats, and there's behavioral patterns, and this is all studied. It's quantified, it's qualified, and it's put into scientific data. When you look at a tiger in zoos, there's things about them that are very distinct, how they behave, and same thing, the research can go into them. But when you take a tiger, the tigers and the lions and the cats that we're working with, I feel, are on a completely different category. Because these aren't wild animals, and these aren't wild animals that were raised in a zoo. These are wild animals that were raised in homes as domestic pets. From an animal behavior standpoint, you really have to wonder how confused that animal is. You know, taking these animals away from their parents when they're just cubs, hand feeding them. There was a study that came out that illustrated that when you actually hand rear kittens, they're more inclined to have behavioral issues and aggression than if you just leave them with their mom and with their litters. So what does that tell you about kittens? Aren't that far away from big cats. What does that tell you about what we're doing with big cats and how we're messing with how they behave? And that fits right into how dangerous and unpredictable they are as pets. It's insane.
And it's actually the very thing that the breeders and dealers will insist. You know, they use it as a excuse for why they have handling of their cubs. They say, oh, these cats have to live in captivity, therefore we have to have them bond with people and be safe around people so that it will be safe to keep them later on. And you're right, it does exactly the opposite. It creates an animal who has no barrier, no fear barrier between reaching out and clawing or biting someone, and yet the power to do such immense damage. So it's like the worst possible thing for an animal, I think, in captivity, to be hand-reared and then not respected for the wild animal that it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Tell me. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I love Scott and Tanya. They were from Turpentine Creek. They were at the Big Cat Conference in North Carolina last year, and I got to spend some time with them, and I've wanted to have them on the show, but they have some issues with internet and webcams that we've just not made that happen yet, so maybe you could help them out there. But it sounds like you had this experience in Africa, and then how did you even come to know that sanctuaries for big cats existed? Because a lot of people don't even know that. How did you find Turpentine Creek?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually had someone in my major that had interned there. So I actually, when I went to Turpentine Creek, I understood it was a wildlife sanctuary, but for some reason I never connected the dots. I never realized that this was a wildlife sanctuary. These were animals coming from people's houses. These were animals coming from situations of abuse and neglect, and people that just decided they didn't want them anymore. So, you know, within the first week, when you walk around, you're reading all these stories. You know, one cat was fed dry dog food because her owner wanted a nice tiger, and now she has scoliosis and all these medical conditions. And then on top of that, those conditions were probably attributed to the lack of care and genetics when people are breeding them together. Because the breeders, you know, SSP doesn't even go under a microscope and study every single gene of the animal. So there's no way a breeder is going to be looking at every single gene and taking out all the bad genes that would result in their cubs. They just continue breeding and breeding and breeding. It's a source of income. And you know, it was just incredible to see these cats and to realize that, you know, the life that sanctuary provides is the absolute best life possible. But that was the biggest shock, is that this is the cat's second chance at life. And it is incredible what they do there at Turpentine Creek. I'm sure it is at Big Cat Rescue and many other sanctuaries around the United States. But it was a real big surprise. And during my time there, that's where I became who I am. I became very devoted to the facility. I worked really hard to help them out on days that I was off, getting them several donations of different sorts, and that's where my passion came from. Scott and Tanya are wonderful people. They put their whole heart and soul into the sanctuary and into the cats and the care of the animals. They go above and beyond, involving the entire city of Eureka Springs, trying to get them out and become involved. They have all sorts of opportunities for citizens to come in and help out the sanctuary. They're featured in all the holiday parades. They do an excellent job of forming community there. So.
Did you find that your interaction with the animals there helped you with your studies as far as having an understanding of some of these emotional issues with the cats?
Absolutely. You know, I think it did both a lot of good and a lot of heartbreak. First of all, I want to start out by saying that at the end of the day, working with big cats all day long, even as much as I love them, what I do is come home to a dog. Because a dog, you know, a dog is safe, a dog wants to love you, a dog is going to snap on you in a second. And that's every second you're out there working with these animals, you have to be on your guard. You have to have your cat awareness. You have to take your 2 steps back. You have to, they're unpredictable. There's a couple individuals there that I did form relationships with. As I'm sure you know, each cat, they're very leery of new people. So you really have to respect them. And I feel the relationships that you form with these animals comes not like a domestic cat or like the breeders are doing, where you're forcing these interactions on these animals. If an animal is not in the mood, you don't interact with it. It's a wild animal. And that's where I think the bonds that I created came from. There's one cat there who's my absolute favorite, but he's one of the cats. His mother came to the refuge. Turpentine Creek didn't know it at the time, but she was pregnant, so they rescued the mother. The mother gave birth. They raised the cub, and then so the cub's been there for quite some time. But he's so playful, but still so wild. You can never predict his intentions, and so that relationship really comes at a distance. With Spike, you know, that relationship, like I said, is built at a distance. I can come up on the compound, he sees me, he stalks me, he's running around like, Dave, come over here, I want to say what's up. But the reality of it is cats play like they hunt. That's how they practice in the wild. That's a scientific fact. Like, if you watch them, when do they go after their litter mates? When their litter mates turn around and they're walking away and they're exposing their back. And that's all, you know, stereotypical behavior of big cats. So we have very petite, like little, very small, not tough hides. The cats have, you know, nice tough hides, and it's just not an physical interaction that is meant to occur. There's no point in it. And people in Africa, people in India, they put space in between these animals. We're the only ones that want to be like, oh, come, give me a hug with your big claws and huge canines. It's really crazy.
Shows our ignorance.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm really trying to. The message I'm trying to put out right here is being responsible. And I spent a lot of time in my undergraduate career working with the Iroquois of New York State. I was really involved in setting up some of their educational camps during the summer. And if there's one thing I can really respect about indigenous cultures, is their responsibility to live on this planet. You know, if there was not enough deer, they didn't hunt the deer until next year. There is a publishable story that you can find on the internet up in Canada, where the wildlife department up there, they had this massive reindeer herd, and the wildlife department wanted to come in and they wanted to exterminate some of them, particularly the older individuals, and the Native Americans up there said, you can't do this. The older ones know what they're doing in times of food scarcity. They know all the routes for migration, etc. So the wildlife department comes in and they exterminate all the older generation, and the whole herd dies off because they couldn't find food when food was scarce. They couldn't find water, etc. Now, what that illustrates to me is that this is a culture that has survived by studying nature, and not by how to improve themselves, but how to coexist with nature. Their houses were round. That was based off of squirrels and their nest box, and the nests of birds, and all their whole culture was learned by watching how other animals survive, and because of that, they developed a responsibility. And extinction problems didn't occur. They weren't trying to take cougars as pets. Native Americans, they stayed away from the cougars.
They worshiped them.
Exactly, and they respected the habitat and the land that comes along with it. And I think that what we've lost as people is our responsibility. We are the smartest organisms on this planet. Why are we choosing to destroy it? I know you watched that Google video. It was a video montage on all the top searches for Google in the past year, and two big ones were hope and science. And one of the things that was quoted in that is that we have hope because we know how to solve many of these problems, but we need to take up responsibility and start acting. And these are some real serious issues that are going to be occurring in the next couple of years in terms of conservation and the environment and global warming and species extinction, etc. And got off on a little rant there, so I apologize. But
well, what are the kind of tactics that you think you would employ to try and reach today's generation in time?
It's very difficult.
There's a lot.
Yeah, like I said, it's such a big puzzle. I'd probably look like Einstein if I try to draw it all out. Probably be shapes and lines everywhere. I think right now, I don't necessarily have an answer yet. I'm still looking on how exactly we can impact our youth. I know that a lot of people my age have reached out to me that I haven't talked to in many years, and have really developed a passion and a concern for what's going on. Generation Awakening in the next year is going to be coming out with a program that will actually allow anyone to click on a particular subject or topic, and they will be able to find every resource on how to become involved in that. That's all I can say at the time, but that's, I guess, right now one of the big tactics I have going on. In terms of what can we do right now as a culture and as a society, I think there's a lot of things. I think in particular we need to reevaluate the 30 different ways of what conservation is and really narrow it down to one task, and everyone needs to carry it out. SSP is a wonderful idea. However, I do not believe we need 150 Sumatran tigers in captivity in order to reintroduce them into the wild. Nor do I believe that we need to be keeping them in a zoo-type setting. There's some SSP animals that are born with traits that are not favorable to the wild. Why is SSP not studying the exact genetics? And if they need more money, that's fine. Stop putting the money into more animals and concentrate on the genetics. I feel that a lot of our money and resources now really need to be put towards a more aggressive strategy, if you kind of get what I'm saying. I think we need to really reevaluate some of the things that we're doing and all work together as a whole. And I think we could see a drastic, complete global shift in less than 5 years if we were to do this. I really do. Really believe in that.
I don't think there's any way that big cats, captive big cats, would ever be successfully reintroduced into the wild. And I really believe, I say all this at the risk of going into another coughing attack, but I really believe that cats breed like cats, and so if we save enough habitat for them, they will repopulate the areas
Absolutely.
where they belong.
Absolutely.
It's just a matter of how do we make people care about an animal that they don't see in person, because the zoos and the backyard breeders have been using this excuse for having cubs is this is how we'll make people care. Well, we've been doing that for 200 years and that didn't work.
It's not working.
Yeah.
It's
So what's
working.
the next plan? How do we get there? How do we make people care about the wild, which is critical to all of us surviving, is that we have trees and air and all of that, clean water. And all of that is because we will save those umbrella species that will then save those regions. I think there's a lot that we can do with CGI and a lot that we can do with videography that in ways that we've never been able to do in the past. So I'm wondering, how do we get people to make that shift from what's not working and yet what is very satisfying to people? Because sure, you go pay $5 and go to your local zoo and you get to see a tiger, whereas you might never get to go to India and see a tiger. So what's going to make them want to save that tiger in the wild?
Exactly. And another interesting thing that you say too about people, visitor interactions at zoos. I don't know about you, but I go to a zoo and it's not the same feeling as when I go to a sanctuary. It's a very different feeling, and I feel like there's a lot of aspects that make that so, and then to blend that into the answer, or my answer to that question is, I feel the most effective way, and this, I have to be careful what I say here because of what we're doing in the next year with Generation Awakening, but I feel that the most effective way to get people inspired is to make visiting these countries and seeing these animals in their wild habitat and seeing what's really going on, and to make that cheaper and to make those experiences possible for kids our age, because there's no greater impact that you're going to have until you get up, you go on a plane, and you fly to what you think you see on TV, and you're sitting in that habitat and you're waiting weeks to see a big cat, because then you know how much they need your help. And when you go anywhere, and there's roads everywhere in those habitats, that nature is really being depleted. And I think that would be the most effective way to really get people. They're doing a great job with documentaries and bringing the film to individuals at homes, on their iPods, on their computers, their Xboxes with their Netflix and all that. But I really think that the biggest impact happens to the people that actually to go and see it for themselves. I know someone that used to own a tremendous amount of exotic pets and exotic carnivores, and he took one trip to Africa. He saw a lion make a kill in the wild, free. That was it. Surrendered all of his animals, and now he's an extremely large advocate for animals here in the United States and for the banning of the private ownership of exotic animals. So.
Wow. Yeah, I've never been to Africa. My daughter's been a couple of times, and people say, oh, you should go before all the wildlife's gone. And I think if I did see it, it would be so sad to me that I just would not be able to continue the work that I do. I think it would have a very different impact on me, but that's only because I've come to it from a different direction.
We're launching a public service announcement in a couple weeks, Generation Awakening, and I didn't even know about. I'm a cat guy. I'm gonna be honest. I'm obsessed with cats. Everything in my room is tigers and lions and leopards, and there's no elephants or rhinos, but they're just as important. And a lot of members of my board really love the elephants and the rhinos. And when the PSA came out, and I saw it, and I saw some of the amount of animals poached in 1 year, it's breathtaking. To see elephants in a decade go from 1 million to 450,000 is insane. And it's something that really needs to be addressed, because you know what? God's honest truth. I understand I'm very young, but at this point, I get asked, every once in a while, but what about family and kids? And well, what kind of world am I bringing a kid into at this point? What am I going to be telling my kid when they say, I want to go to Africa, and why can't I see elephants? And what kind of parent does that make me? And so that's why I feel it's all of our jobs and all of our duties right now. It's something called the seventh generation. It's another indigenous philosophy. And we have the duty to make sure that this planet and all of its beauties and wonders and resources are available for 7 generations to come from now. And that's a huge way of looking at life that I believe everyone should look at as well.
That's a huge commitment. 7 generations. Oh my gosh.
Well, they got it right. They did it right. I mean, we're landing on the moon and meteors and modifying all sorts of things genetically. We should be able to keep resources for 7 generations. So that would be ideal.
Well, we have a vested stake in making that happen.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm guessing that you're familiar with a study, probably much more so than my mangled attempt at it here is going to be, but where they had studied people observing advertising where chimps were in close proximity to humans, and what they found was that when people saw those ads, instead of becoming more aware of chimps being endangered and the things that we needed to do to save them, that they actually had exactly the opposite effect, because people thought, well, they wouldn't be using them in ads if they weren't so threatened. I don't know that this study has ever been done with exotic cats, but I really think that it should be. Can you kind of weigh in on that?
I cringe every time I see a commercial of a big cat or advertisement with a big cat. Out of all the animals that I've come in touch with, the one that lies most close to my heart is an African lion that was abused in the commercial industry. And so on a personal level, if you want to, there's no need to advertise animals in commercials or advertisements that way at all. I know when it does come to zoos and having information out, like I said, there's an entire field dedicated to that. Environmental interpretation. How do we effectively put signs out and express information? Why aren't we digging really deep into that? Because wouldn't that be effectively changing the views and educating the public? So I'm not sure if that exactly answers your question, but
well, maybe you could tell me a little bit more, because this whole study of environmental interpretation is something I've never even heard the phrase before, so maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what that is and what it hopes to accomplish.
Sure. So environmental interpretation investigates everything, and like I said, the ideal thing is for us as stewards or as park rangers, park guides, to create this attachment using education between a guest and a resource. So in our case, it would be big cats, right? And so environmental interpretation studies all aspects of human psychology while bringing in scientific knowledge. So I'll give you an example. When I first started my documentary, I sent it to my professor who really helped me out get into environmental interpretation, and I said, this is my outline. I want to talk about this cat and how she was shot by BB pellets. I want to talk about this cat and how he was held in a 6x4x6 cage. And she says, whoa, hold on. She says, would you want to watch that? And so I started thinking. I said, maybe not. And she said, you got to remember that what we're trying to do is we're trying to inspire people. And so we actually reshaped our entire documentary to be a very inspiring and happy film instead of showing what you would consider the doom and gloom. And so environmental interpretation has studied and illustrated that people are more likely to turn a film off if it shows the real heartfelt realities that's going on. And that seems kind of silly, but people just don't want to see that. Other examples of environmental interpretation is sign use. So what's more effective, having a huge sign with a ton of dense information, or having a couple facts, or having both a sign for kids and adults where you start out with big bold writing on key facts that kids would like, and then you get smaller and smaller and more in depth and more complicated. And a lot of people in my program have actually gone out to animal care facilities and studied the effectiveness of signs and visitors, and that's what this study is really. That's what this field is really based on. It's how to impact the general public with education on these resources. Some of the individuals from our program actually found zoos spent a quite deal of money on signs, but they weren't as effective as they thought. And so my big argument is we have the tools, we have the data, we have the research, we have an entire field. And why aren't we putting that at the top of the line? So it's very, very interesting.
You know, I'm curious about that because I've always heard that it's like 1% of the public will actually stand there and read a sign through to its end, which would be a product of how much text is there.
Exactly.
So it makes sense that you're saying break this down into digestible chunks. Are there elements of these signs that would be more effective in a sanctuary type situation? Because the sanctuaries that I've been to, I don't see a lot of signage. There'll be a sign with the cat's name and maybe where it came from, but there's not much in the way of explaining how captivity is affecting animals in the wild negatively rather than positively, and those kinds of topics. So I'm wondering, when you're studying signs, is it only in zoos, or is this going to be across zoos and sanctuaries?
I am a sanctuary advocate. That is my goal. I am. It's very hard to come into a zoo management field when you come from the sanctuary background, just because people are afraid of what they don't know. And I have been standing very strong for sanctuaries throughout the whole thing. And yes, I plan next semester, along with several other individuals from my department, to start investigating into the sanctuaries and what would be most effective for sanctuaries, and then publishing and distributing this information to Big Cat Rescue and Turpentine Creek and Lions, Tigers, and Bears, and all the other great sanctuaries around in the United States, because why not? It'll help you guys out, and I feel it'd be really great. You're absolutely right. It'll be a challenge, and there's so much information you want to say, but you don't want to say because you want it to be effective. So it's like, how do you level that out? Another element of environmental interpretation is you don't want to vomit everything out. You want that individual to go home and start researching and start discovering and caring on their own. So there's a lot of elements into just putting into a sign that'll effectively work. And I think what I'm really trying to push is we have these tools. We have this information available. Let's use it. Let's really start getting work done. So hopefully we'll be seeing a lot more of that over the next couple of years here during my program.
Last year we did something called the March for Lions, where a lot of people all around the globe did different things for the March for Lions, which was to raise awareness about the fact that the lion numbers are plummeting in Africa. And so what we decided to do here at the sanctuary was, our tours are all guided, so the entire time that somebody's out there, they have a tour guide who is either telling them, or we have an automated system which is telling them about the stories of the cats, and we try to work in all of those elements about, why it's wrong to have your picture made with a cub, and how these cats can't be set free, because that's the biggest thing I hear from people, is they really believe the people who are breeding and dealing in these animals when they say that they're breeding them for conservation, and people want to believe that. So that's a hard message to overcome. But anyway, for this thing, I'm looking at, okay, we're going to have 500 people walking through the sanctuary. They're not going to get the benefit of us talking to them as they go through, because it's just a 1 hour thing where they walk through. So I had all of these signs made up, must have been 50 or 60 of them, that just had one sentence per sign about lions. So you'd go down 30 feet and there'd be another one, and you'd go down 30 feet and there'd be a different one, and so you'd have these different messages, so that if they read it all, they would try to get we'd try to get some of those messages across to them. But when we did it, I thought, wow, this is awful because this is only about lions. We only have 3 lions here. We've got mostly other types of cats. And so I went and made a whole bunch of signs for the sanctuary and hung them on the barricades that are only about 1 sentence long, and they have a nice picture so that they attract your attention to the sign. But what I don't know is that effective? I don't know if people are reading that when they're on the tour, and I don't know how I would know.
We can do that for you. I'm very serious. We can do that for you. Simply going out in 2 ways. We can observe. We can quantify it in how long is each visitor. How many visitors are stopping? How long are they staying? When do they leave? And then at the end of that, we can give surveys out at the end and state one thing that you learned about a lion. And if that same fact came from your sign, then it's a very effective sign. So
I think that might be difficult for us because we don't allow tours of just people wandering around, so you couldn't tell if they were stopping because of the sign or because their tour guide stopped there.
Okay.
But you might be able to, if you were to be standing off to the side, see whether or not people are looking at the sign and appear to be reading it.
Yep. And then time how long they're spending at each one, and if a group of 20 comes by, how many do you see glance over at the sign? How many do you see read the sign, and how long do they read it for? And if you get a large enough data sample of that, that'll give you some pretty valid data for you. Absolutely.
I'll be interested to do that. Maybe even assign some of our interns to it, because some of these signs now that they're color and they're out in the sun, so they're starting to fade. So before I put a ton of money into them, I need to know whether or not they're really effective.
Yeah, and I will put you in contact with some of the people that have done that in my department and in this graduate program, and they can show you what they did at other facilities, and that can definitely help you.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Speaking of people in my master's program, I have another guest for us here. This is Kyle Taitt. And Kyle, come on over. I'd like him to join the conversation too. Kyle is a really intelligent young man, a biologist, and his passion is he has a lot to say about big cats and then also about primates.
Oh, wonderful. Can you hand over the headset to Kyle, since he's
Sure.
going to be doing most of the talking, so we don't have that echo? Oh, that's a great idea.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good, thanks.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, tell me how you got involved in this.
So, I've been really passionate about the plight of exotic animals in captivity for several years now, and having grown up in Kansas and Kansas City, it's not uncommon to, have the classifieds come around on Sunday, and you flip open the paper and you see that there are a lot of exotic animals that are for sale. The shocking thing about these animals being for sale a lot of the time is the price tag. The amount that they're being sold for is next to nothing. And so it does not, there's not even a barrier to keep people that definitely financially are not going to be able to provide for these animals from getting them. So, I mean, when you see that, for example, a lion cub or a tiger cub is going for about as much as, a purebred lab, or in a lot of cases, significantly less.
Right.
You can thereby guarantee that these people have no idea what they're getting themselves into. And the other interesting thing is, immediately you get this animal for $300 to $500, and it doesn't seem like a lot, but when it gets to be an adult, you're talking about an animal that's going to be costing the amount of a new car every year just to meet its day-to-day needs. And the average household is not going to be able to afford a brand new car every single year. And when
That's
you're
a great
living with,
analogy.
yeah, it's crazy to think about, but I think one of the issues is that people don't think about that. They don't think long term. They think about how nice it would be to have a fluffy little lion or tiger in their house and how cute they are, and they don't think about the fact that this animal not only is going to get big enough to kill them, but also is going to be an animal that's going to cost them way more than they could ever feasibly expect to have. So I think that's a big issue.
I think there's a big misconception too, that people think, well, I'll play with it while it's little and then I'll give it to the zoo.
Exactly.
Your local zoo
Exactly.
does not want this animal.
Exactly. As if zoos were even in the slightest interested in expats, you know. So, and I mean, I think there's also a big responsibility issue that we're facing too, with people not taking personal responsibility for these animals being in captivity, and people not understanding that the way that we portray them in the media, and the way that, you know, so often that we see them and that we experience exotic animals, whether it be in commercials or whether it be because Paris Hilton bought one, or because, you know, Justin Bieber buys this monkey and carries it around like it's his baby. Um, you know, all of these sorts of things are kind of how kids are seeing animals these days, and it's tragic. It's really disappointing, but I think that is a really core part of the problem, is the fact that the exposure to wildlife that people so often have these days is limited to inappropriate exposure. And as Dave had been saying earlier, I too have family members who know that this is the kind of stuff that I study and this is what I'm interested in. And so then I get a text of my little cousins holding a tiger cub or a lion cub at some shady facility in Texas or Oklahoma, and then, you know, I'm extremely disappointed, but you don't know how to express that without seeming rude or self-righteous. But at the same time, they don't understand the plight of these animals once they reach adulthood. I mean, we're talking about, again, these facilities are almost never hold on to these animals once they reach adulthood. Then they give them to legitimate sanctuaries. People who are actually interested in conservation, people who are actually interested in animal welfare, is where these animals will end up. And unfortunately, sanctuaries are being overloaded with all of these animals. There's a huge problem, and it's being fed by ignorance, by people who buy these animals on impulse, by facilities who say, by all means, yeah, why don't you come hold our baby tiger or baby lion? And they don't even think about the fact that when they do that, they're not at all helping conservation. They're not at all helping people to understand that these animals need to be respected, that we need to fight for these animals and their habitat. What they're learning from that experience is, look how cute this animal is, I gotta hold it, I gotta touch it, I want one. That's what they take home from that. And I think it's a really, really scary problem. And it's a really big, very real problem that the exposure that people have to these animals is increasingly inappropriate, negative sort of exposure. They don't really get the knowledge that they should have about these animals.
Why do you suppose mainstream media has not done more to expose what happens to those cubs? Because they know. I mean, we talk to the channels all the time about the bad programming that they air.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, I suspect there's kind of several things going on there. I think that with how much negativity is human centric, and with all the terrible, tragic things that are going on in people's lives every day, I think that animals and stories related to animals and their plight in the United States simply doesn't make the cut for things that the people and the major media outlets find to be interesting or find to be worthwhile, which is completely unfair, because I think that one of the other big issues that people overlook when they decide to take on a big cat as a pet is whether or not it's even remotely ethical. So I think a lot of the times people think about, you know, if you look at the arguments from people who live in Texas and Oklahoma and other states where this kind of thing is so legal, a lot of them will say, well, I don't want my rights limited. I don't want my rights to be limited to whether or not I can own these animals. But when you say things like that, you're inherently viewing these animals as nothing more than property. And so I think that to view this issue as a matter of property rights rather as a issue surrounding individual rights and the rights of these animals themselves to have some comfort, some peace in life, and not to be kept in an inappropriately small enclosure and have inappropriate, weird contact with a species that will never meet their needs.
fails to meet your neighbor's rights as well, who may not want to live next door to a bunch of big cats.
It absolutely does, and that's another huge problem, is that with the number of people every single year that we see, there's photo opportunities, and I know in Kansas, Missouri, Texas, there's a lot of places where people can go get their senior pictures taken with an adult tiger or lion. It's absolutely absurd to me that there's any legal loophole that you can make that a possibility for some. And I mean, inevitably and obviously, people do die from this. People die every year because they decided to go get their senior picture taken with a tiger adult. And I mean, if that doesn't scream bad idea to you, then that's a major failure of media, not to be getting this message out that, hey, these animals can be extremely dangerous, and then a lot of the times that gets unfortunately gets translated into a fear of these animals, or there's a difference between a healthy fear of these animals, which everyone should have. People like Dave have expressed that, talking about how you don't want to turn your back on these animals and things like that. That's a healthy fear, but he understands these animals, he respects these animals, he loves these animals. And that's a major difference from the sort of unnecessary fear, the kind of almost xenophobic, I hate them because they're big and scary type fear that is so often translated in the media when they do cover these stories. I think they botch it a lot, because when they do cover it, they make everybody really, really inherently scared of them without explaining that it's actually not the big cat's fault at all. We're talking about an animal that's big enough that play. I mean, when you play with your golden retriever at home, when you play with them, and when you're having them chase you around the yard and they come up and they kind of play tackle or play bite, things like that, it can just be all in good fun and games. Well, even if a tiger or a lion is just trying to have fun, is not being aggressive, and is just trying to be fun and interesting and play with you, you could die. And it could just be because their flesh toy broke, It could just be well, I'm playing with you 1 second and oops, you broke. It's like it's not always inherently aggressive. I mean, it definitely can be. It absolutely can be. But even when it is, we need to be thinking about what the cause of that aggression was. Might it have something to do with the fact that we kept this animal in a tiny cage, fed it an inappropriate diet, and gave it inappropriate human contact its entire life? No, certainly that has nothing to do with this, right? I mean, it has everything to do with the fact that this animal is inherently bad, and doesn't have anything to do with the fact that we've been keeping it like a prisoner for its entire life and exposing it to nothing natural, to exposing it to nothing to what a tiger or lion's life should be, and making what they are able to experience a very narrow and inappropriate spectrum of a tiger or lion's life.
The people that raise these animals as pets will tell me, my cat loves me. The cat adores me, because the cat's all excited when they come with food. But I tell them, you open the door and let the cat loose, and that cat's going to not even look back. It's just going to walk away. It loves you so much.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's really sad, and I mean, it's amazing to think about how people don't also realize enough about human psychology, and about how we can feel so attached to other animals without realizing that attachment does not go both ways. Just because you are fascinated with this cat, and just because you love this cat, it's easy to delude ourselves into thinking that they feel similarly about us, out of comfort, out of just ignorance, and out of feeling better, out of just feeling like I would be happier if I could get myself to believe that this cat loves me the way that I love this cat. Because at the end of the day, that's what anyone wants from their pet, right? Is you want a pet that's going to be loyal, that loves you, that is excited when you're home. And I think that's what we do get from dogs, and that's why dogs are so special and so amazing. And unfortunately, that's not what we get from big cats. You have an animal that's perhaps excited because it recognizes you, that you're going to be home to feed it, to give it food. But it's not excited for your company. A lot of the times we're talking about animals that are solitary in nature. So I mean, there's absolutely no reason that a tiger should see a hairless bipedal primate and think, oh my gosh, here's a normal social interaction for me to engage. I mean, it's just, there's nothing about that's normal. So I think it's really easy for people to delude themselves into thinking that these animals love them and are really excited by them. And the unfortunate truth that's comes out time and time again when we see people get mauled is that it's not as much of a loving relationship as we'd like to delude ourselves into thinking that it is.
How do you think we can reach people kind of at the point of sale where they're getting ready to make a decision that is going to impact an animal for the rest of its life by paying to have their picture made or paying to go see them at the zoo? How do we get to them before they make that bad decision and give them the information they need to make a good decision?
Well, I think it's really important to target the places where these animals are coming from and to have people try to expose these situations. I mean, you don't go get a lion or a tiger at your local pet store. There's not going to be a puma you're going to see for sale at Petco. These kinds of things aren't happening. So what we need to do, I think, is to identify the areas where people are getting these animals from exotic animal auctions, from private breeders, and we need to take these issues on head on. We need to have people sitting there outside of these auctions, and we need to have people saying, maybe think about this again, because there's whether or not it's feasible for you to care for this animal. I mean, there's a few different questions we have to ask. We have to ask, first of all, is it ethical? And I think both you and I would agree that due to the fact that there's so much inbreeding that goes on with these animals, there's no way we're going to be getting them a proper diet. There's no way you can afford an enclosure like a sanctuary has for them. For those reasons, it's absolutely not ethical. Is it feasible to think you could construct an enclosure in your backyard large enough to house a big cat? Of course not. That's definitely not feasible for 99% of Americans. Is it fair to the animal? Is it fair to your neighbors? Is it fair to the cousin you may have that comes over, the little kid that wants to pet the animal and gets its arm ripped off? I mean, are we being fair to anyone in these situations? And then, is it legal? And unfortunately, this is another huge problem, is that, it is so often legal. There are several states in which you need no permit at all to own a lion, a tiger, a puma. It's crazy. So I think we need to have people out there giving information to these people, because anyone who's going to an exotic animal auction to purchase a tiger or to purchase a bear or a puma, clearly they have not had exposure to the long-term issues that this presents to both that animal and to humans as well. It's a major risk to the animal's welfare, and it's a huge risk to human welfare also. And I think that a lot of the people that go there to buy these animals simply haven't had that message reach them yet. I mean, I think if people really did understand that we're talking about an animal that's going to need 10 to 15 pounds of meat per day once it gets to be full grown, how are you going to be able to afford that? You're not. There's no way that you're going to be able to buy that for this animal. And even if you could, again, it comes back to ethically. Even if you could provide for this animal, would it still be ethical for you to keep an animal that's meant to be living in Africa or India, living in a cage in your backyard in Texas? And no, I mean, it's just not. These animals do not belong in backyards. And I think just getting that message out to people before they buy these animals, and to having people present and having people from this movement there at these auctions to try to talk to these people before they make that decision, try to counter these really poorly thought out impulse buys, then I think we can kind of curb the amount of people that decide to buy tigers and lions at these auctions.
It's kind of the strategy that PETA has used for years with circuses, where they stand outside of the venue and hand out pamphlets. And I think that would be an easy enough thing to do with these exotic animal auctions, because those are typically, they're advertised well in advance. Everybody knows the places that do it.
Right.
So, it's easy to camp out in front of it and do something with signage or billboards or those kinds of things to reach people. It's been my experience from the animals that we have rescued from people that had them as pets, big cats they've had as pets, that the vast majority of the people have said that they rescued it from somebody who had it as a traveling show, pay-to-play pimped cub. And so I think what happens most of the time with big cats is that when the people who are exploiting the cubs for pay-to-play can't use them any longer when they get too big, they are just either giving them away or selling them very cheaply to people who are on their mailing lists that already have an affinity for what they do and think that they're doing something good. And so those people feel like they've rescued that cub by giving it the forever home that they never can
Right.
get.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we reach those people.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a huge problem too, because it's so weird that people can be in a position where they feel like they're rescuing an animal when they're taking it from one poor situation and putting it to another. Nobody says, for example, that when somebody gets transferred from one prison to another that they got rescued because they got an hour in a bus. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you're in the same situation. You go from one terribly insufficient habitat with terribly insufficient care, with people who have no idea what they're doing, who don't care about conservation, who are exploiting these baby animals for their own benefit and for the dollar that comes from it. They are not at all interested in these animals' biology or their conservation. And then they go from that to the house of somebody who maybe is well-intentioned, but you have to realize you're not rescuing a big cat when you're taking it to put it in your backyard. What you're doing is you're endangering your life, you're endangering your neighbor's life, and you're ensuring that this cat is going to live in subpar conditions for the remainder of its life, or at least for the remainder of its time being insufficiently cared for at your residence. So I do think that's a huge issue, and I think that's one that we really ought to be talking to people about. Is now what does it mean? What would we say actually constitutes a rescue situation, right? So I mean, by definition, a rescue would be going from a poor situation to going to an optimal situation, or going to at least a better situation. And unless we can ensure that that's actually what's happening, let's not call it a rescue. Let's not delude ourselves into thinking that we're doing something ethical or something right by these animals by moving it from one insufficient situation to another. That's not rescuing. So I think the way that we reach those kinds of people is that we try to make sure that the laws are in place to sort of kind of curb that. Because I mean, the fact of the matter is, there are several states in which you don't need a license, you don't need anything to own these animals. So it's really easy for these people to say, well, there certainly would be laws against this if it was as dangerous as people want me to believe that it is. There'd be no way that I'd be able to own this animal or be able to rescue this animal if it were illegal. So I think if we try to push for action to change, legislative action to change, to actually change the circumstances under which people are allowed to have these animals. I think until we reasonably make those kinds of changes, I don't really see a whole lot of difference being made. I think that as long as it is legal, I think there's going to be a whole subculture of people that will do it regardless of whether it's ethical, regardless of whether they know better, regardless of whether the animal's going to suffer its entire time living with them. I think it's a very selfish subculture, but it's one that exists and one that we need to be addressing.
Martin Luther King had a great quote that I'm sure I will only be paraphrasing, but he said that legislation cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless. And
exactly.
Years ago, back when I was part of the Feline Conservation Fund and really believed that I could educate people about how to take care of these animals better and could make sanctuaries better and all of those kinds of things, I was naive. But, I really believed that we could educate our way out of it, and I don't think we can. I really think legislation is the only way that we can really put a halt to all of the abuse going on out there with big cats. And then we can educate. But first off, we just have to stop the flow at its root by banning the private possession of these animals.
100%. I mean, I couldn't agree more. There's no doubt whatsoever that no amount of education, no amount of outreach is going to stop some people from buying these animals. There will always be a small minority of people that will buy these animals even though they know that it's dangerous and that it's unethical. And that is a huge problem. But I'm hopeful in that I think that most people that consider themselves to be in a position where they would consider owning an animal like that would be able to be talked out of it. I actually do think that that humans are pretty intelligent, pretty reasonable animals, and I think that we're able to be talked out of poor decisions. And I think that's something that makes us really unique and really special. And I think most people fall into that category. Most people can be shown the evidence and can change their mind. So I think that it's not something that we can approach from just one facet or another. We need to be approaching it from multiple facets, and we need to say, look, we have a responsibility to educate people, to make sure that they know the plight of these animals in captivity, to make sure that they know that what it would actually take, what is required of sanctuaries to care for these animals. And further, we need to change the legislative structure. We need to change the fact that Joe Smith may not buy what I'm saying for whatever reason. He may not like the fact that we're telling him that we want to limit his ability to own something that could kill the neighbor kid next door. Maybe that won't resonate with him. Maybe he'll decide to make that purchase anyway. So we need to then make sure that that's not a possibility for him, because doing that is selfish on so many different levels. So I think it's something that we really do need to be approaching from multiple facets.
One of the most frustrating things to me is how people who are exploiting these animals hide behind their USDA licenses as if they were a badge of honor. And the public believes, oh, well, USDA is inspecting them, so it must be a good place. And they just have no idea how ineffective that is in reining in the bad guys.
Right. Well, I mean, every single roadside zoo is accredited at some, has some different accredited status. And the unfortunate fact of the matter here is that doesn't really do a whole lot for ensuring the animal's welfare in captivity, because actually looking at what the regulations state about big cats, it's shockingly minimal. It is shockingly minimal. I mean, it's equivalent to saying that you're fine to keep a cat in the kennel that you take your cat to the vet in for its entire life. That's essentially what the regulations state. It needs to be able to rest away from its feces. Well, that corner doesn't have feces in it, so that corner does, but it's a 10 feet by 6 foot enclosure, and that's all this animal will ever experience. It'll never be able to run. It'll never be able to scratch anything, never be able to play, never be able to experience new smells. It's confined to a cell for its entire life, and yet by the standards of the agencies which regulate this, that's deemed appropriate or deemed acceptable. And that is another area where we need to be making changes, because I do think that there do need to be agencies which regulate animal welfare, and I respect the fact that such agencies exist, and that I think that that's a good thing. I like the fact that there are people that are subject to random inspections. I think that's extremely important, but I think the standards to which those organizations use to inspect need to be drastically modified, especially for big cats, because I think they've really just gotten unfair portrayal of what it is actually that we can deem acceptable care for them, because it really is just so minimal, and nobody who studies animal behavior, who studies animal welfare, could suggest that those minimums are anywhere near acceptable for those animals to be held in. And yet,
I'm gonna just jump right in again real quick, but just because on that, I just finished writing a paper on the regulations in captivity, and I think that the more we understand and the more we study about their behaviors in the wild, and then study their behaviors in captivity, it can illustrate how drastically those regulations need to be changed. So a female lion in the wild has a home range of about 250 kilometers. You know, males are a little bit more, over 300 kilometers. Now you're putting that animal in a smaller, much smaller enclosure here in captivity. And there's studies that have illustrated that enclosure size actually increases, you know, the smaller the enclosure, the more cortisol or stress hormone is secreted inside that animal. So there is studies out there that illustrate that our guidelines should be changed a little bit and made
a lot.
A lot, and be directed a lot more towards what exactly that animal needs.
Right.
And I think in doing that, we will clearly have demonstrated that these animals are not suited for captivity.
I think it's interesting too, though, that this information has been out there for a while. You know, I mean, we've known for a while, for example, the range that these animals have in the wild. We've known for a while what their day-to-day behaviors look like, what their maximum speeds are, what kind of social organizations they live in, if they're gregarious like lions or perhaps solitary like tigers. But we know this information. And yet somehow we still don't see any emphasis on changing these regulations or on improving these regulations, because I do think that the regulatory agencies themselves need to be there and are an important part of this picture. But I think that the fact that the minimum standards are as low as they are is really inexcusable, given the amount of knowledge that we have about what these animals do in the wild and how they function in the wild, especially given the fact that we know that you're going to see a marked increase in stereotypic behavior of an animal that's confined to an incredibly small enclosure. I think it's sort of arbitrary to try to say that we have any idea what a minimum enclosure should look like for any of these animals. It's really it's certainly not something that's been studied in any formal scientific capacity, looking at what the enclosure side is when you're going to see the minimum amount of stereotypies or minimal cortisol. There really hasn't been any studies like that, and so I think that when we start giving out these really arbitrary minimums of saying that, well, this is appropriate to keep a tiger in a 6-foot by 10-foot enclosure for its entire life on concrete floors, you know, I mean, I think once we start looking at those sorts of situations, it becomes very clear that we have the knowledge of that we would expect to cause a shift here, and yet it's not being well received because no action is being done to change these.
I think there's two problems with regulation. One is, I think regulation is done by the wrong body. In most cases, in the states where there is any kind of a state law, it's administered by the Department of Natural Resources, which is in most states primarily geared toward hunting and promoting hunting. And so their entire mindset is that these animals are to be used for human enjoyment. And so those are the people that are being put in charge at the state level. And then at the federal level, you have the USDA, which is the government body that regulates how you can kill animals to eat them. And I think it should be the judiciary body, if any government agency, not an agency that's already at cross purposes with providing the Animal Welfare Act or ensuring the Animal Welfare Act with these animals. But I think it becomes, in either case, state or federal, the regulations just can't work, because you're never going to catch people doing the worst things that they do to these animals because of the way those inspections are done. The inspector comes to the gate. They're delayed at the gate by the people in the front office who then get on the radio to everybody else and say, you know, stop doing all the bad stuff out there. And then they take the inspector around. They don't do any undercover. They're never going to find any of that abuse going on. They can tell if a cage meets their minimal standards.
Which is nothing, which is, I mean, I literally can't imagine an enclosure that didn't meet those standards, just because it wouldn't fit the animal to begin with, because that's basically all that it was required, is that, does it fit the animal? Cool, then the minimal enclosure size, minimal enclosure size is met because the animal fits in there. I mean, it's ridiculous. But I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's really, there's a big problem with conflicts of interest and sort of the way that the regulatory agencies go about looking into these things. I think that, like you said, the fact that these organizations already have sort of regulations that they're putting on agricultural animals or on animals for hunting purposes. I mean, that kind of shows a little bit of an inherent conflict of interest for somebody that should be regulating whether or not, you know, Joe Schmo next door should be able to have a tiger as long as he has an exhibitor's license or something like that, you know. And that's the other thing, is that there's really not any vetting of who can get licensure. I mean, anyone can really apply for licensure for, you know, animal exhibition acts or something like that. And you don't really have to have any background or any experience. You just have to have the application fee, and then you can be a licensed exhibitor who's able to keep a tiger in his yard in a 10-foot by 6-foot enclosure.
And that's one of the, I'm sorry, I'm dealing with a building that they're putting up out there, so I need to go soon. But I lost my total train of thought there. Oh, the application fee. You're talking for a USDA license. It's $40. It's
right.
A one-page name, address, telephone number. But what happens, and I just find this absolutely amazing that this is allowed, is that you can go and apply for your permit to have hamsters, and you get your permit, and then the next year you say, and now I've got 20 big cats. And there's no change in licensure between
right.
hamsters and big cats.
Yep.
Nobody's
exactly.
going to say, well, you know, you're okay for hamsters, but you're not okay for lions and tigers.
Right. Yeah, you are exactly right. You are exactly right. The way that it's set up currently, it's a blanket license that allows you to keep really anything. And as long as you specify every year when you report which animals you do have now or which animals you're holding that you're not currently exhibiting and those sorts of things, then you're fine. But yeah, I mean, I do think that there should be agencies that are big cat specific agencies that actually look into who should and who shouldn't be licensed. Almost something similar to perhaps AZA to actually regulate sanctuaries or to regulate people who want to start a small legitimate rescue operation. There ought to be another regulatory body who can give a leg up to people who are actually trying to do the right thing, who are actually interested in animal welfare and actually interested in providing these animals some quality of life in captivity, realizing that they'll never be able to give these animals what the animal deserves. And any good sanctuary, any good zoo, any good facility that works with exotic animals will tell you that they realize that they will always fall short of the complexity that nature would have provided these animals, but they're always working towards providing better for the animals that they have. And I think that alone says a lot about the kinds of organizations and the kinds of people who are responsible enough to care for these animals. So I'd like to see a change in the regulatory bodies that actually look into sanctuaries and actually look into rescues and things like that, because the unfortunate truth of the matter is that a lot of sanctuaries and a lot of roadside zoos that think that they're doing rescue work do not hold themselves to anywhere near the standard that you all hold yourselves to. And the standards that you all hold yourselves to are not required. Nobody's requiring you to make sure that you're giving your animals excellent care. Nobody's saying, you know, you're going to go out of business if you don't make sure that your animals have room to run and have, you know, grass on their feet. Nobody's saying that. You recognize that that's what these animals deserve. You recognize that these animals deserve to have a quality of life in captivity that is not going to be provided to them in a 10-foot by 6-foot concrete cage. It seems extremely obvious, but the unfortunate fact is that most organizations aren't on that same page. And so I think that it would be nice to see a change in regulation where people who are actual big cat experts and big cat enthusiasts, people who recognize what these animals should be having in the wild and captivity, are the ones who are making the calls about, yes, this is an appropriate establishment, or no, this is not an appropriate establishment.
Today is the last day of the 113th Congress, and so it was kind of sad because we had a federal bill pending that would ban the private possession of big cats, and what it did was it made exceptions for the AZA zoos, and then it made exceptions for sanctuaries that met a certain criteria, because we didn't want to write into the bill that they could only be accredited by the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries, because the bad guys will say, well, you're just making a club, and if you don't belong to the club, you can't be a sanctuary. And so what we did was we said, okay, rather than say that the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries determines who can or cannot have these animals, then how could we write into the bill language that would only allow the better sanctuaries to continue to rescue animals? And so we made that definition to be that they don't breed, buy, sell, allow public contact, or take the animals off-site for public exhibition. And that's a pretty good, I mean, if you're doing all of that,
That's
it's probably
great. Yeah.
a good sanctuary,
Yeah.
whether you're
Yeah.
accredited or not. And I really think we could probably do the same thing with AZA, rather than, because now you got this little pseudo group called the ZAA that I believe is just a bunch of pet owners that are trying to confuse the public and make them think that that's some sort of legitimate accrediting body. If we just made whatever that exemption for zoos is high enough that only the better places that provide decent animal care and housing and those sorts of responsible care, then we might get away from some of the opposition that we've had from those who are trying to slip in under these other accrediting bodies. So I think it's possible, and we plan on reintroducing the bill January. We're working on it right now. So I'm really excited about the prospects of it. The first Congress, they're 2-year Congresses, so the first year Congress we got up to 60 co-sponsors. This year we ended with over 120. And I really think in the next Congress we can actually push it through to the finish line.
That's great.
That would be huge.
Mm-hmm. It'll be 98% of the problem gone.
Yeah.
But then, it's going to be sanctuaries are going to need some help.
Yeah.
Sanctuaries are going to need, because where are they all going to go? And it's going to come down to us.
And we've written in there that they can stay where they are. They just have to be microchipped and registered so that those people aren't continuing to breed and buy.
Oh, that's even better.
Because you don't want to take away anybody's animal if they actually are providing decent care.
Right.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean that would be huge. That really would be a vast majority of the issues that we face cut right out. And I think it would also put a little bit of responsibility on the facilities that decided to continue doing that. But no longer would they be able to call themselves a rescue group or a sanctuary.
Right.
And I think that is huge, because if any sanctuary is letting you handle a cub, then clearly they don't. It's not a legitimate sanctuary. Right. They're not really interested in captive animal welfare, because these animals would not be interacting with humans as cubs. They'd be interacting with their mother and the other cub, the other litter mates that they have. So I mean, it's I think that adding very specific, easily measurable things like that to the legislature would be phenomenal. You've got all my support, and I very much hope to see that passes, because I do think that would cause an enormous shift away from the sorts of practices that are responsible for increasing the number of animals in captivity unduly.
And it's not putting anybody who is legitimate out of business, because anybody who looks at sanctuaries out there, Big Cat Rescue is one of the best funded sanctuaries out there. We don't allow cub handling or breeding or public contact, right. Or even our volunteers aren't allowed to touch the cats. And right. So we're able to be hugely successful by doing the right thing. All we're asking other people to do is do the right thing. Right. It'll be good for you.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, too, that I think that you guys do a great job of, and that other sanctuaries like Turpentine do a great job of, is letting people know that hey, we're not telling you that there's no capacity for you to work with these animals. We're not telling you that just because you can't have one in your living room, that you can't ever have any experience with them, that you can't ever learn about them or work with them. That is not at all what anyone is trying to tell people. What the message that sanctuaries are doing, good sanctuaries are doing a good job of getting out is that, hey, if you are passionate about these animals, let's find a way for you to work with them in a professional capacity, which is going to help their needs in the wild, which is going to help educate the public. And if we can meet those needs with animals who are unfortunately already in captivity, then I think that's excellent. I think that there needs to be sort of when we tell people that they can't have this animal in their living room, some people that's going to really bum them out. That's going to make them unhappy. But there should always be that silver lining of, just because you can't have it in your living room does not at all mean that you can't pursue a career in biology and study them in the wild, or pursue a sanctuary career and learn about how these animals end up in sanctuaries, and learn about what we can do to curb that, and learn about what it takes to care for these animals in captivity. All of those options are still open to people. So everything that's good for the animal's long-term welfare, whether in captivity or in the wild, all of those options are completely still open to the kinds of people who think that owning them as a pet might be a good idea.
Oh, that is a great message. We're at the hour-and-a-half mark, and these people that are working on this building are going to drive me nuts. I've got to go out there. Is there any parting words of wisdom that you'd like to offer?
I just, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having us on today, and that I think that the work that you all do is phenomenal. I think the YouTube videos that you guys put out there to educate people about how cats get to where they are, and to what can be done to prevent that is a really big, important piece of the puzzle to ending the breeding and ending the trade of exotic cats in captivity. So I just want to end by saying I really appreciate the work that you guys do, and recognize how important that is to the conservation of large carnivores.
Well, thank you so much. You know, back when we could only afford 3 paid positions, one of them was videographer, because we really felt like that was going to be how we would reach those people.
It's an excellent way to reach people.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's huge.
I'd also like to say, I'd like to say thank you very much. It was a pleasure being on the show. I'm always following you guys. You guys do some wonderful things down there. Really appreciate the Big Cat and Public Safety Protection Act that you guys are passing through. And just for everyone watching, let's do it. You know, I have, in reality, when people ask me about my career, you know, it's always like, well, what are you going to do with that? And now, I produced a documentary, became the director of a nonprofit, and got into a graduate program featuring mentoring right under Tim Harrison. I mean, it's like a dream come true. That happened in the last year, and the only reason it happened is because I acted. And everyone watching right now, and everyone that sees this video, you all have the ability to act, and you all have the ability to make this change.
Well, that is a great way to end this. Thank you so much. In the show notes, I will put a link to Generation Awakening, and any other links that you want to give me, please email them to me, and I'll be sure they're on the show notes page. Everyone else, thank you so much for joining us for Cat Chat, and I hope you will see us next week. It's been a long time in between, but I really hope to get back on the schedule of doing these once a week.
Great. We look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.